The SUV flew into the air like a slingshot-launched toy, a wild flash of metal and glass, spinning mid-air before smashing sideways into the HOA's prized flower display. A tidal wave of petunias burst across the yard, and her scream, sharp, high, and furious, sliced through the morning calm like some kind of banshee anthem for the entitled. But that wasn't the beginning. That was just the moment everyone finally saw it. What they didn't see was what came before. The subtle nudges, the slow erosion of respect, and the quiet fury of a man who only wanted to be left alone. 5 seconds before she flew, she'd rolled down her tinted window and smirked. "You don't own this driveway, nerd boy." 5 seconds later, her luxury SUV was tilted like a fallen domino on a bed of ruined marigolds. Hood hissing steam, ego bruised beyond repair. And me? I just sipped my coffee, the steam curling like a silent applause in the cool air, and said to nobody in particular, "I warned her." But it didn't start with a gate. It started with quiet. That's what I bought this house for. My name is Jack Moresby. I'm 62, semi-retired, and I've designed mechanical systems, mostly defense and security, for most of my adult life. I'm not a soldier, not a hero, just a guy who understands pressure systems better than most people understand their own coffee machines. All I wanted was a place to tinker, think, and maybe take up fly fishing if my arthritis would shut up long enough. This house was perfect. A long driveway curled off a sleepy cul-de-sac like a private trail into solitude. The garage was detached, with enough space for a small machine shop. I had an office window that faced the driveway, my little porthole to the outside world. I liked watching squirrels more than I liked people, and for a while that worked just fine. Until she moved in. Karen. I know it sounds like a cliché, like I'm making this up, but that really was her name. She arrived in a leopard print windbreaker, barking orders at the movers like a junior drill sergeant high on espresso. Within 24 hours, she knocked on my door, not to introduce herself, but to ask if I planned to trim the hedge again, even though it was already trimmed. I thought she was being sarcastic. She wasn't. That should have been my first red flag. Then came the complaints. The garage light was too bright. The faint smell of solder from my shop was toxic. She asked why I didn't attend HOA meetings. I told her I didn't even know there was an HOA. That's when she smiled and said, "Well, there is now. I'm the new president." You'd think that would be the climax of some bad sitcom. But no, that was just the setup. First, I tried to ignore her. I've dealt with pushy engineers, petty clients, and overzealous project managers. This was just noise, right? But the noise got louder. Karen started using my driveway as a shortcut, cutting through my property to avoid the roundabout loop of the cul-de-sac. The first time, I figured she was lost. The second time, confused. The third time, I walked out and waved. She slowed just enough to roll down her window and chirp, "Hope you don't mind. Saves me a minute or two." And then she drove off, like I was some NPC in her suburban video game. The next morning, I caught her again. This time I was ready. I waved her down and, as politely as I could muster, told her the driveway was mine, fully deeded. I'd appreciate it if you didn't use it without asking. She laughed. Not a kind laugh, not the chuckle of misunderstanding. A cruel, dismissive cackle, like I just told her the moon was made of cheese. "Oh, come on," she said. "It's just concrete. You don't even use the front half. Besides, I'm the HOA president now. I could technically make it community access if I wanted." That last line, that technically, that's when it clicked. She wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous. Not the kind with fists or guns, but the kind with paperwork, whispers, and just enough confidence to ruin your life through bureaucracy. I went back inside, printed out my property deed, and double-checked it. No easement. No right-of-way. That driveway was mine as much as the air in my lungs. Still, I figured it would die down. People cool off, right? Wrong. The next day, I found a red sticker slapped on my mailbox. Obstruction of community flow violation notice. No city seal. No official number. Just a cheap template, a fake HOA letterhead, and an air of smug self-importance that practically screamed Karen. I walked over to her house. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been waiting. "Oh good," she said. "You got the notice. Maybe next time you'll cooperate." That was the moment I stopped pretending I could ignore her. Now, I'm not a man who goes looking for fights. My back aches in the morning, I prefer flannel over confrontation, and I once spent 3 weeks building a model train engine just to see if I could make it run on hydrogen. But when someone threatens my space, my peace, my home, that's war. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. I just nodded and went back to my shop. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I'd spent a good part of my life designing security systems for government contracts, embassies, airfields, high-value target zones. I had access to old schematics, one in particular of a retractable hydraulic plate designed to stop vehicles at speed. Silent, invisible, powerful enough to halt a delivery truck mid-charge. I never thought I'd install one in a suburban driveway. But life's funny like that. The following weekend, I called my friend Caleb, a retired Navy Seabee who owed me a favor. We faked a backyard barbecue while pouring concrete over a carefully dug trench. The hydraulic arms nestled under the new decorative tile, with pressure sensors and a camera system tied directly to my phone. 3 modes: warning, delay lift, and emergency intercept. It wasn't a weapon. It was a boundary. 2 days later, I watched from my window as Karen zipped through again. No hesitation. Tires screeched. Dust flew. I tapped my phone, just enough to activate the soft blue LED warning. Next time, she stopped halfway, climbed out in her yoga pants and designer sunglasses, and actually tried to lift one of the tiles. "This is harassment," she screamed. "You don't scare me, Jack." Oh, Karen. The day after, she called 911 and claimed there was a medical emergency, requiring access through my driveway. A fire truck showed up. I let them through. Then Karen followed, honking and waving like Miss Suburbia 2025, with a grocery bag in her lap. I filed a complaint for misuse of emergency services. The HOA ignored it. In fact, they backed her. Community safety, they said. Shared responsibility. So I sent them a polite cease and desist letter, my property survey, and a high-resolution photo of the no trespassing sign I'd installed. The next morning, the sign was gone, ripped down and thrown into my rose bushes. That's when I knew I'd given her every chance, every warning, and she still chose to cross the line. So I activated emergency intercept mode. Because the truth is, people like Karen, they don't stop. They don't reflect. They don't retreat. They escalate. And when she did, when she gunned her engine down my driveway one final time, muttering into her Bluetooth about turning my garage into a community gym, I didn't panic. I didn't flinch. I just watched as the hydraulic plate rose and Karen flew. But that was just the beginning, because the real story isn't about a driveway. It's about what happens when you push the wrong man one step too far. A man who's already done the math, built the frame, laid the wire. A man who knows where the line is drawn, and what happens when someone decides that line doesn't apply to them. That, my friend, is where this journey really starts. And you're not going to want to miss what comes next. She didn't come back the next day, and part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, the sight of her luxury SUV nose deep in geraniums had knocked a bit of sense into her skull. But men like us, we know better. We've lived through too many wars, whether overseas or across the dinner table. We've seen what pride does to people who mistake it for power. Karen didn't learn. She regrouped. At precisely 6:32 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell rang. Not 6:31. Not 6:33. That's how I knew it was her before I even checked the camera feed. She was punctual in the way only tyrants and tax auditors are. I opened the door slowly, coffee in hand, breath still foggy from sleep. And there she stood, in a blazer 2 sizes too tight, hair still damp from what I imagine was a very aggressive shower. Her SUV was gone, towed off sometime during the night, but her indignation remained like perfume that clings to a room long after the woman's left it. "You're going to jail," she hissed, before I even had the chance to say good morning. "That thing you built is a death trap. It's assault. I've already contacted the police." I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped out onto the porch with the slow confidence of a man who's triple-checked every inch of his property line and knows exactly where the law begins and ends. "Karen?" I said with a calm that seemed to offend her more than any shouting ever could. "You trespassed repeatedly. You were warned. You ignored clearly posted signage. You destroyed property. And now you're upset that the driveway defended itself." Her face flushed the color of a bruised cherry tomato. "This isn't over," she spat, turning on her heel so hard her kitten heels clicked like gunshots on my concrete path, and with that she stormed off. But of course it wasn't over. By lunchtime, a new notice had been slid under my door. Again, not mailed, not emailed, just shoved under like a teenager slipping a breakup letter into a locker. It was from the so-called HOA, signed only with the board, claiming I was under formal violation review for installation of a hazardous device that endangers community members. Attached was a black and white printout of a photo, Karen's SUV mid-flight. Someone had even scribbled "malicious obstruction" in red Sharpie under it like they were labeling evidence in a kindergarten courtroom. Now here's the thing about men in our stage of life. We don't panic. We document. I poured another cup of coffee, opened my files, and compiled a report. Time-stamped footage, sensor logs, copies of emails, a notarized version of my land survey. And then I called Greg Turley. Greg was a lawyer I'd worked with on a product liability case years ago. Tough as jerky, no patience for nonsense, and a natural-born skeptic of HOAs with too much time and not enough bylaws. After 30 minutes reviewing my files, he said, "Jack, if they try to take this to court, we'll countersue so hard they'll forget how to spell easement." That night, I found out Karen had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. I was not invited, of course. It was listed in some obscure corner of the neighborhood Facebook page that I never checked. Thankfully, my neighbor Paul, former Coast Guard, sharp as ever despite his hearing aid, caught it and tipped me off. I didn't go there to fight. I went to watch. That's how old men like us win. We don't shout in the moment. We listen. We wait. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige building that looked like a retirement home forgot to die. I walked in late on purpose, right as Karen was wrapping up a speech. She stood flanked by 3 board members who looked like they'd rather be watching reruns of Matlock. She had printed slides, dramatic photos of her poor SUV, carefully cropped to remove any footage of her entering my property. She even read quotes from the HOA handbook like she was a preacher at a sermon none of us wanted to attend. "We cannot allow private citizens to weaponize their homes," she said. "This is a violation of trust, of safety, of everything our community stands for." She turned toward the board. "I propose we vote to demand immediate removal of the system and fine Mr. Moresby for endangerment." Before anyone could raise their hand, I stood up. Slowly, deliberately. I didn't speak. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked forward, pulled a small USB stick from my coat pocket, and handed it to the young man operating the projector. What followed was devastating. Footage from the security camera. Every single instance Karen had trespassed. Every warning she ignored. The emergency services stunt. The destruction of my sign. Her own voice declaring, "Maybe I'll fake an emergency to get through again." The room was silent. One board member cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should delay the vote until we have more context." Another nodded, avoiding eye contact with Karen. She stood frozen, face pale. For the first time, she didn't speak. She didn't have to. The footage had done all the talking. After the meeting, a neighbor clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You ought to post that video online." I smiled but didn't answer. That night, I uploaded it to a popular subreddit under the title, "HOA President Repeatedly Trespasses, Gets Launched by Driveway Security System." The post exploded. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments, reaction videos, engineers breaking down the system's build with admiration. Someone even called it engineering poetry. Karen, predictably, filed a police report accusing me of constructing a military-grade assault device. The officer who showed up at my door watched the footage. He shook his head, laughed, and said, "Most satisfying use of home defense I've ever seen." No charges were filed, but they did open an investigation into her misuse of emergency services, distribution of fake notices, abuse of HOA authority. The house of cards was beginning to collapse. Over the next week, 2 of her board allies resigned. A neighbor I barely knew dropped off oatmeal cookies and whispered, "We've been waiting years for someone to stand up to her." Another gave me a handwritten statement detailing how Karen had fined him for having a too creative mailbox. Greg called the next morning. "We're not just defending anymore," he said. "We're going on offense." We filed a formal counterclaim against both Karen and the HOA. Defamation, property interference, emotional distress. Karen responded by doubling down. She sent an open letter to the neighborhood accusing me of weaponizing the internet. She framed herself as a martyr, the last protector of suburban order, under siege by rogue engineering. But nobody bought it anymore. The footage had peeled back the curtain, and what they saw wasn't a leader. It was a tyrant unraveling in real time. The HOA called a closed-door session without her. A quiet man named Victor, retired Navy chaplain, always wore a weathered Cubs hat, emailed me privately. He said Karen had once tried to fine him for flying a flag that wasn't neutral enough. He said people were finally ready to vote. So I waited. I watched. And as the foundations under her presidency began to crack, I prepared. Because men like us, we've seen this kind of collapse before. It always starts with noise, but it ends in silence. And I had a feeling that silence was coming. Soon. 3 days after the video went viral, I got served. It was a Wednesday. Cloudy. Just a hint of that old Tennessee humidity starting to creep back into the spring air. A process server in a blazer too sharp for this zip code rang my bell and handed me a thick manila envelope with the kind of expression that said, "I don't want to be here, and I know you don't want this." He didn't explain, didn't offer small talk. Just handed me the envelope and turned away like he was walking off a crime scene. I opened it right there on the porch, beside the spot where Karen's SUV had once taken flight like a bad idea with 4 wheels. It was official Karen R. Mansfield, acting as both an individual and representative of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, was suing me. She'd cited property damage, reckless endangerment, emotional distress, and, this part actually made me laugh out loud, driveway weaponization. I swear to God, she had bullet-pointed the repairs to her car, including a crushed cup holder, a cracked vanity mirror, and, my personal favorite, a missing air freshener of sentimental value. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a bourbon in one hand and the lawsuit in the other, and I remember thinking, she really thinks she can spin this. That's the thing with people like Karen, they don't want justice. They want revenge, but with receipts. The next morning, I called Greg. He didn't sigh or groan, just said, "Let her." But now we play hardball. And so we did. While Karen riled up the last of her HOA loyalists, Greg and I pulled out every shred of documentation. We found neighbors willing to testify, folks who had been slapped with fake citations, fined for having garden gnomes, and even one woman who was threatened with a child welfare report for letting her kids play chalk games too close to the sidewalk. Every single one had a story. Everyone added weight to ours. But here's the part they don't tell you about civil lawsuits. It's not about what's true. It's about what's provable. And Karen knew that. She was banking on theatrics, on twisting the narrative into something palatable enough to pass for credible. That's why she showed up to the preliminary hearing dressed like she was auditioning for a courtroom TV drama. Navy blue pantsuit, pearl earrings, a stack of folders she barely looked at but made sure everyone else saw. Her lawyer, a smug little shark named Wilson with slicked back hair and breath that probably cost more than my security system, opened with a speech so syrupy I thought we were in a Hallmark movie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is a case about unchecked hostility in a peaceful community. About a man who, instead of resolving conflict through dialogue, chose to build a machine. Yes, a machine that could have killed someone. My client, Mrs. Mansfield, has endured trauma, humiliation, and property loss due to Mr. Moresby's contraption. He even used finger quotes. Then he played the clip, his version. Cropped. Edited. No audio. Just Karen's SUV suddenly airborne, landing in chaos. Cue the gasps from the few residents who hadn't already seen the real video. Wilson turned it off and folded his hands like he'd just won an Oscar. Then Greg stood. No theatrics. No dramatics. Just a quiet confidence that only a man who's been in 100 legal foxholes can carry. Your Honor, he said to the judge, a woman in her 70s with eyes that had seen through more BS than a cow pasture. We'd like to play the full footage. And that was the turning point. The judge leaned back, nodded, and motioned for the screen. What followed wasn't just video. It was revelation. Karen's car zipping through my driveway. Her yelling, "You don't own this road." Clear signage saying private property. Her laughing. Her mocking. Her tearing down the sign like she was ripping off a bandage from a wound she'd inflicted. Then her voice, clear as day. Maybe I'll just fake an emergency to get through again. The room went quiet. Karen looked down. Wilson blinked and shifted in his seat. Greg followed it up with documentation. Sensor logs, survey maps, city ordinances, even a short breakdown of the engineering behind the hydraulic gate, complete with safety thresholds and default warning settings. Wilson tried to object, claiming the system was excessive. The judge overruled him. Then came the question, the one that stripped the whole case to its bones. Did the HOA, at any point, the judge asked, formally vote, file, or pass a motion that granted community access across Mr. Moresby's property? Wilson stammered. Karen, exasperated, blurted out, I didn't need a vote. I'm the president. And just like that, it was over. The judge recessed for 15 minutes. When she returned, her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. She dismissed Karen's lawsuit, stated that the hydraulic system was lawful, justified, and operated within private property rights. And then, she scheduled a separate hearing for my counterclaim. Karen didn't blink. She just stood there, motionless, like someone unplugged her from reality. Outside the courtroom, Greg clapped me on the shoulder and said, Now comes the fun part. What he meant was discovery. See, once you file a counterclaim, you get to dig. And dig we did. Subpoenas were issued, emails pulled, financial records exposed. And what we found was a gold mine of HOA corruption. Karen had been using HOA funds for unscheduled landscaping evaluations, which translated to paying her nephew to mow her lawn. She'd find people without board approval, faked meeting minutes, approved maintenance projects that never happened. But it wasn't just the paperwork. The emails. We found messages where she called one neighbor a mildewed prune, mocked another for owning a Kia like a peasant, and referred to me repeatedly as that garage goblin. In one exchange, she even wrote, Maybe I'll get him evicted just to watch him cry. We compiled it all. Every page, every timestamp, every snide, arrogant remark. Greg put it into a presentation that would have made J. Edgar Hoover blush. Meanwhile, online, the original video had gained traction again. Someone had remixed it to opera music. Another built a scale replica of my driveway with a tiny springboard SUV. The comments were brutal. The internet had chosen its villain, and this time they weren't wrong. Karen responded the only way she knew how, with more control. She sent out an HOA-wide letter declaring herself a victim of digital terrorism and accused me of radicalizing the neighborhood against proper governance. She even held an emergency community meeting, but only 6 people showed up, and 3 left before it ended. Victor, the board member who had quietly helped organize the first real vote, reached out. It's time, he said. They scheduled the vote quietly. No flyers, no posts, just whispered conversations, backdoor confirmations, and a whole lot of tired neighbors finally ready to stop being afraid of one woman with a clipboard and a loud voice. I didn't push anyone. I didn't knock on doors or stir the pot. I'd done my part. I'd held the line. On the night of the vote, I stayed home, until Victor showed up on my porch with 2 folding chairs and said, You ought to be there. People need to see you. She needs to see you. So I went. and I watched the neighborhood do something I hadn't seen in years. Stand up, speak up, take back their peace. The vote wasn't even close. Karen was done. But we know, she wasn't finished. Not in her mind. Not yet. Because people like her, they never leave quietly. And I wasn't done protecting what was mine. It was a Friday afternoon when I saw the black SUV. Not the crumpled wreck that Karen had launched like a misguided missile months earlier. That one was long gone, probably in some scrapyard collecting rust and irony, but a new rental. Sleek, unassuming, too polished for the kind of neighborhood where dandelions and cracked sidewalks were part of the charm. It rolled slow past my house, window down just enough to let me see her eyes. She didn't wave, didn't sneer. She just looked. One long, deliberate stare like she was carving my face into her memory for later use. Then she was gone. No words, no gestures, just that look. I stood there, half a socket wrench in my hand, heart beating just a little faster. That look wasn't over. That look said round two was coming. And I'd better be ready. 3 days later, I got the envelope. It was slipped under my door in the dead of night. No postmark, no return address. Just my name typed in bold, uppercase letters. Inside, a USB drive and a single sheet of paper that read, "Thought you'd want to see this before it goes viral again." My gut clenched. I plugged the USB into my old laptop, the one not connected to the network just in case something shady came through, and watched. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Karen standing in an airport, berating a gate agent. She was louder than usual, more unhinged, yelling about status and refusing to sit with animals. Her voice cracked with that same manufactured outrage she used on her neighbors, but now it was aimed at someone just trying to do their job. She even pointed at a soldier in uniform and sneered, "Why is he up there? What did he do? Fight in a war?" The video cut off before the agent could answer, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This wasn't just another Karen outburst. This was a pattern. And now someone else, maybe an airline employee, maybe a bystander with a phone, had caught it. She hadn't changed. She'd just found a new battleground. I didn't upload it. I didn't have to. The next day it hit Reddit, then TikTok, then the evening commentary shows. They dubbed it Airport Karen. Within 12 hours, someone had mashed it up with the SUV launch footage. From driveways to runways, the title read, "I should have felt vindicated. I should have laughed. But instead I just felt tired." This was a woman who couldn't be humbled, couldn't be reasoned with. She lived on indignation, thrived on confrontation, and now, the internet had turned her into a meme she couldn't control. But here's what hit me hardest. Even though she was gone from Willow Creek, her presence still lingered. People still hesitated before putting up decorations. Kids still looked over their shoulders before riding their scooters too far from the curb. The trauma hadn't evaporated with her exit. It had settled into the cracks of the community like smoke after a fire. And that, more than any viral video, made me realize we hadn't fully healed. Not yet. So I decided to mark a new chapter. Not with fanfare, not with another machine. Just a message. I upgraded the hydraulic gate not for defense this time but for meaning. I added a slow rise feature and attached a small LED panel. When it activated, it didn't launch, didn't jerk. It rose steady and strong, and on the screen it read, "Private property. Respect is free." I didn't post about it, didn't tweet it, but word got around. Neighbors would stop and look. Some would smile. One kid even asked if it was a transformer with manners, and I'd nod and say, "Something like that." Meanwhile, the lawsuit had officially wrapped. Karen's appeal was denied, and the judge's opinion was scathing, calling her actions a pattern of manipulative behavior designed to intimidate and dominate. She was ordered to pay part of my legal fees, which I doubted I'd ever see. But that wasn't the point. The point was this time someone like her didn't win. Not in court, not in whispers, not in power. A few weeks later, Victor, the new HOA president, invited me to a barbecue. Said it was part of his neighbor's first initiative, a way to turn the page. I showed up out of curiosity more than anything. There was lemonade too sweet for my taste, a grill manned by a guy who thought he was the Gordon Ramsay of bratwursts, and someone had even dragged out a karaoke machine. But the vibe, it was different. Warm, relaxed. People laughed. Not nervously like before, but openly. They teased each other about lawn ornaments and dog poop signs. Someone joked about the flight of the SUV mural that had popped up on the park wall. I didn't feel like a pariah. I felt like a neighbor again. Even a few of Karen's old allies were there. One, a man named Harold who had once signed off on half her fake citations, came over to me with a cup of soda and a sheepish look. "She made us think we were protecting the neighborhood," he said. But really, we were just protecting her ego. I didn't say anything, just nodded and clinked my cup to his. That was enough. That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and kids drew chalk aliens on the pavement, I realized peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from boundaries, from saying no when it counts, even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy. A month later, a young couple moved into Karen's old house. No drama, no clipboard, no crusade. Just two people starting fresh with a toddler who liked to run barefoot through the living room dragging a stuffed bulldog. I dropped off a welcome basket. Bread, wine, a printed neighborhood map, and a note that said, "If anyone ever tells you the HOA owns your driveway, call me first." They laughed and invited me in. I stayed long enough to hear the kid name his stuffed dog, Captain Barkley. Felt peaceful. That night, I went through the old security footage. Not to dwell, just to clean house. I deleted most of it, the fake notices, the showdowns, the launch. All of it. Except one clip. The moment Karen climbed out of the SUV after it landed. Stunned. Mascara smeared. Silent for once. I didn't keep it because it was funny. I kept it because it was a turning point. For her. For me. For all of us. I never saw her again after that SUV stare down. But sometimes, when the wind hits the trees just right and the porch lights flicker like they used to during those long HOA meetings, I think of her. Somewhere out there. Still glaring at another driveway. Still believing the world owes her the fast lane. I hope she learns something. I really do. But if she doesn't, that's fine too. Because I did. And so did everyone else. Now the gate stands tall not as a threat, but as a symbol. Of resilience. Of sanity. Of the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground when everyone else is telling you to fold. It hasn't had to launch anything since. Maybe that's the real victory, the kind that doesn't have to roar anymore. It just stands there, quietly powerful. A line in the concrete, yes, but also a line in the sand. And sometimes, drawing that line is the only way to start truly living again. It was just before Thanksgiving when I noticed something strange on my porch camera feed. Not strange like the old days, no fake citations, no HOA compliance checks. No Karen glaring through the blinds like she had a direct line to the neighborhood god. No, this was different. Subtle. There was a shadow near the gate at 2:14 a.m. Not a person exactly, more like a linger. A shape that hovered for too long then disappeared. I checked the footage twice, then 3 more times with frame-by-frame review. Could have been a possum. Could have been someone casing houses. But my gut, that same gut that once told me to install a hydraulic deterrent instead of waiting for another friendly HOA notice, told me it was her. Not Karen herself, I wasn't that paranoid. But something connected to her. Maybe someone she sent, or maybe just the echo of her chaos refusing to die quietly. I didn't report it. Didn't even mention it to Victor at the next community gathering. Some instincts don't scream. They whisper. And this one whispered, "Watch, just in case." Life had been good since her exile. Quieter for sure. The kind of quiet that older men like us, men who grew up on the tail end of analog and know what silence is worth, appreciate like a good scotch or a perfectly tuned socket wrench. The neighborhood had shifted. You could feel it in the way people parked with more confidence. How they no longer feared an HOA patrol snapping pictures of their recycling bins. Victor had organized an actual suggestion box. Real paper, real anonymity, no fear of retaliation. People submitted ideas like painting murals, holding free CPR classes at the clubhouse, even bringing back neighborhood movie nights on a projector. We'd become something like a community. Not perfect, but human again. That was when the letter came. No envelope this time. Just a folded piece of legal-sized paper, taped, boldly, stupidly, to my mailbox. It read, "Some people still remember. Not everyone forgives." That was it. No signature. No accusations. Just that. Cold, ambiguous, and pointed. I stared at it for a long time. There's a unique kind of insult in cowardice. The kind that won't even leave a return address. I pulled it off, walked back inside, and slid it into the same file folder where I kept the leftover remnants of Karen's legal nonsense. Not because I thought it would come to anything, but because you don't throw away threats. You document them. That night, I installed a new sensor package. Not because I was afraid, but because I'd learned something from the whole saga. Boundaries are not a one-time fix. They're maintenance. Like a good fence or a faithful old truck. You keep them tuned, cleaned, ready. A few days passed with nothing. Then I got a call from Caleb, my buddy who'd helped me build the original driveway deterrent. "Jack," he said, voice hushed like he thought someone might be listening. "You seen the HOA website?" I hadn't. I rarely checked it unless someone forwarded a link with a laugh. He sent me the screenshot. A new motion had been posted. Proposal to review safety standards for personal security installations within community property lines. It was vague. Too vague. The kind of bureaucratic fog that lets someone hide a knife under a handshake. I went to the next HOA meeting. Didn't plan to speak. Just observe. The room was fuller than usual. Not packed, but you could feel the buzz. On the far side of the room sat a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, polished shoes, the kind of haircut that always looks recently done. He didn't speak. Didn't vote. Just watched. After the meeting, I approached Victor. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the stranger. Victor glanced over, his brow pinched. "Says he's a new homeowner. Bought the white ranch at the edge of the loop. Name's Martin." That wasn't the part that made my stomach tighten. It was the way Victor said it, with doubt. With the tone of a man who smells a lie but can't yet find the source. "Keep an eye on him," I said. Victor just nodded. The next week, things began to slide again. Someone filed a noise complaint about my garage. Said my tools were creating a hostile environment. The complaint came from Anonymous. That same day, 3 houses down, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kimmel got cited for an unsanctioned seasonal display. A wooden turkey her grandson had made for her. She cried when she took it down. That was the moment I knew. Karen may have been gone, but her virus was replicating. Martin was too slick, too calculated. He introduced himself to neighbors like a politician with a hidden briefcase. Smiled too much. Asked too many hypothetical questions. "Do you think it's fair for one house to have private security when others don't? Or isn't it kind of dangerous to have mechanisms that could injure someone, even a trespasser?" It was Karen's playbook word for word, but with a new cover. One evening, I caught him snapping a picture of my gate. When I stepped outside, he pretended to be texting. I said nothing. He didn't apologize. Just walked off. The next day, I got a letter. Official HOA stationery. It read, "We have received multiple inquiries regarding the legality and safety of your driveway installation. A review is being scheduled." I could have laughed if it weren't so transparent. The ghost of HOA tyranny was back. It had a new name, a new face, but the same hunger for control. That night, I pulled out the old project files. Not to retaliate, those days were done, but to remind myself what this had cost. What it had taken to say no and mean it. I rewatched the original footage. Not the viral version, the raw, uncut one. Karen's voice, her mockery, her fury. Then I watched the gate rise. The arc of the SUV. The silence afterward. Not victory, just silence. I realized something then. This wasn't about gates or driveways or even HOAs. It was about ownership. Not of land, but of voice. Of peace. Of the right to say, "This far, no further." I met with Victor the next morning. We had coffee on his porch, no formality. I told him about Martin. The photos. The tone. The way he was trying to bring back Karen's game with a fresh coat of civility. Victor nodded. He'd felt it too. We need to bring people in, I said. Not for a fight, for a reckoning. Quiet but firm. And so we did. 2 weeks later, we held a neighborhood forum. No agenda, no votes, just stories. People stood up and shared. Mrs. Kimmel talked about her turkey. A man on Oak Drive told of being cited for having his niece's car parked in his driveway overnight. A veteran named Roy shared how Karen once told him flags needed prior approval, if flown on weekends. One by one, the stories poured out. And at the end, I stood up, told them about Martin, about the photos, about the proposals written in pretty ink but dipped in poison. I didn't tell them what to do, just what had happened, what might happen again. That night, they voted. Not for a removal, not yet, but for transparency. For a rule that all HOA motions must be published 14 days prior to a vote, with named sponsors. Passed. Unanimously. Martin left the next week. No fanfare. No excuses. The White Ranch was listed quietly, and a young family moved in by Christmas. No one knows if he was working for Karen. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just another middle manager who thought control made him important. But it didn't matter. The gate still stood. Quiet. Steady. No longer a launch pad. Just a line. And across it, a message that still glowed in the early evening. Private property. Respect is free. It was never about revenge. It was about remembrance. About the choice to protect without striking, to witness without war. And now, finally, to rest without fear.